How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Swan Drop. Today is July 20th, 2021, and today we're going to forecast the amount of dry air we should expect in the Atlantic for the near future, as well as the long term future, as well as the Saharan dust over the next several weeks and even months. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe. If you want to see more weather content, make sure to like. If you like this video, make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather content. So let's begin by taking a look at the current water vapor load for the entire tropical Atlantic at this point, and you see that there isn't really much convection going on in the Atlantic at this time, and there isn't really a defining feature we're taking a close look at in the Atlantic, which could pose a threat for tropical cyclone development. We do have a little bit of a trough moving through the United States at this point, but none of this convection is expected to create a tropical cyclone, and we have a little bit of convection towards Central America, but it is nowhere near enough to create some sort of tropical cyclone. And we do have a little bit of convection just off the coast of Africa, but it isn't expected to develop into any sort of tropical cyclone over the next several days. And you see that outside of those areas of convection, the Atlantic is pretty dry, not only when it comes to tropical cyclone development, but it's just very quiet throughout the Atlantic, and we're seeing a lot of dry air as a result of Saharan dust coming off Africa, which typically happens during the early months of the hurricane season. We typically get a lot of dust from the Saharan desert as a result of a lack of precipitation during the early months of the hurricane season in Africa. It's not until August and September where we begin to see the conditions moisten up in Africa to the point where Saharan dust isn't as much of a threat. But however, currently we're seeing an abundance of Saharan dust all throughout the Caribbean and dry air, which is stabilizing the atmosphere and making conditions very hostile for tropical cyclone development at this time. Taking a look at the current look at the Saharan desert, you're going to see that if we move all the way back to around what's happening right now, this is the 20th, and you see dry air is pretty much swallowing up a lot of the main development region at this time. And you see that the dry air is extending towards the Caribbean at this time and all throughout the main development region. And this as of Thursday, July 22nd. So you see that the dry air is swallowing up just a lot of the main development region, which is inhibiting tropical cyclone development. And if we were to take a look at the forecast in the future, you see that we're going to see that dry air continue to move westward and eventually into the Gulf of Mexico. So the good news is that for now, tropical cyclone development should be inhibited for the most part all throughout the tropical Atlantic. There might be some areas, maybe let's say the Gulf of Mexico or maybe just off the East Coast, where we could maybe see a chance of tropical cyclone development, mainly arising from a stationary front or a trough moving through the United States, bringing an area of enhanced convection. Maybe we could see some sort of tropical cyclone out of that, but outside of that, any sort of tropical cyclone development in the main development region and the Caribbean at this time is very unlikely. And your question might be, how long will this last, and should I be concerned once the Saharan desert leaves, or once the Saharan desert leaves or gets away from the main development region? So we certainly need to take a look at that, taking a look at the 5-day tropical outlook. Again, new tropical cyclone development is expected over the next 5 days as a result of just an abundance of Saharan dust in the atmosphere. Because what Saharan dust does is it creates a trade wind inversion, and what that means is that the lower level atmosphere, where it's very moist and it's very warm, is cooler than the higher level of the atmosphere where the dust is located, which means that it creates an inversion where the very moist and humid and warm sea surface low level air is gonna sink as a result of the warmer Saharan dust air, because since cool air always sinks, since the moist air that's in the lower levels of the atmosphere isn't able to rise as a result of an inversion, which is going to force, since the Saharan dust layer is warmer than the lower level moist layer, then that means that we're not going to see a lot of moisture reach the upper levels of the atmosphere to create that latent heat that hurricanes and tropical cyclones require for development. So as a result, tropical cyclone development isn't expected over the next several days, and it's also good to point out that the Saharan dust blocks a lot of short-wave radiation from the sun from hitting the ocean surface, so that could lead to cooler water temperatures than what you typically see for the short-term future with this Saharan dust. And taking a look at the precipitation anomaly to see if this will change over the next several days, you see for today it's expected to be much drier than average when it comes to precipitation all throughout the Atlantic, with only isolated areas just south of the main development region and closer to the Central American countries such as Honduras and Nicaragua could receive some precipitation, above average precipitation, but outside of that, most of the Atlantic is drier than average for today, and you're going to see this will continue. However, it's good to keep in mind that once we head into however, it's good to point out that once we head into August 3rd, which is around 2 weeks from now, we'll begin to see slightly more moisture along the coast of Africa, and I think that should moisten up the atmosphere enough to where the Saharan dust could maybe end within, I'd say, a little bit less than a month from now, 3 to 4 weeks from now, where we'll begin to see the atmosphere in Africa moisten up to the point where it could remove that dust layer in the main development region. However, for the short-term future, within the next 2 weeks, the CFS model is expecting drier than average conditions throughout the Atlantic, which is certainly good news that over the next 2 weeks, we might not see much tropical cyclone development at all as a result of this Saharan dust layer, and the lack of moisture in Africa will help support that. So this is certainly something we certainly need to be happy about over the next 2 weeks. However, it could change based off what the CFS model is saying within the 3 week time frame, or it could maybe happen as early as 2, because you see that by around August 10th to August 3rd, we begin to see a little bit more moisture than average off the coast of Africa, and there's still a lot of uncertainty with long-term forecasts. So if the atmosphere somehow moistens up in Africa earlier, then that means that we might see more tropical cyclone development earlier. But for the time being, it seems like for the short-term future, I'd say over the next week or two, tropical cyclone development should be unlikely as a result of how much Saharan dust is in the atmosphere at this time, but I do expect that to change, especially once you head into a more active part of the hurricane season. So you guys certainly can't let your guard down just yet. Taking a look at what the GFS model is saying when it comes to total precipitation over the next 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, you see that most of the moisture is expected to be just south of the main development region, as the Saharan dust is definitely inhibiting tropical cyclone development overall, and the lack of precipitation pretty much proves that. And same goes for the Caribbean, same goes for the Gulf of Mexico. So the good news is we should see tropical cyclone development at a minimum for the next several weeks. Moving on, however, we could maybe see tropical cyclone development as early as week 2, because we might see a shift in the MJO pattern. And if you don't know what an MJO pattern means, it's pretty much a pattern that moves from an easterly to westerly direction, an interseasonal climate variability pattern that changes every 30 to 60 days for a region. And you see that as the blues and the purples represent more convection than average, more rising air, while the reds represent more sinking air and more stable air overall. And you see that eventually, as we move into week 2, we begin to see that the more buoyant air, the more convective air from the MJO move further eastward. So I'd say maybe as early as week 2, we could see tropical cyclone development once we have more convection in this region, and we'll see more convection in along the coast of Africa, which should moisten up the atmosphere to limit that Saharan dust from entering the main developed region of the Atlantic. So that's certainly something we need to keep in mind. Taking a look at what an MJO really is, you see that uh, during a negative MJO, we see more convergence along the surface of the atmosphere, which forces a lot of those air molecules and the water vapor further upwards. It creates an upward, more buoyant motion with the air molecules, while in a positive MJO pattern, we see a more downward motion where we see more convergence along the upper levels of the atmosphere, while we see divergence in the lower levels of the atmosphere. And you see when we're in the negative Madden Julian oscillation, you see that more convection is bound to occur, and that's expected headed into week 2 as the MJO pattern shifts. So overall, for the dust and dry air forecast, I expect it to last, I'd say maybe around 2 weeks. So I'd say for this week and next week, tropical cyclone development won't be really likely, which is certainly good news. We don't want to see much more tropical cyclones, especially after how active this hurricane season has been already. But again, do expect it to change headed into the months of August and September once we see the atmosphere moisten up a little bit, and once we enter negative MJO pattern for a lot of the Atlantic, which will promote a lot more convection and moisture throughout the Atlantic overall, which should put the Saharan dust at a minimum in the Atlantic for the month of August, which is concerning because that's one of the more active months of the hurricane season. But remember, whether there's 20 hurricanes or one hurricane, all it takes is one hurricane to completely change a community, to completely change people's lives. So do not underestimate a hurricane season. If we do see maybe a period of quiet activity, when there's even one tropical cyclone that could hit your area and completely change your life. So make sure to always stay tuned to your local forecast and just stay prepared for the rest of the hurricane season. But anyways, guys, I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather content. Make sure to like if you like this video, and make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather content. I hope you guys have a good day.